For 8 months London burned. Every night the Luftwaffe came, and every night British anti-aircraft guns fired thousands of rounds into the darkness, hitting almost nothing. The statistics were devastating. One enemy aircraft destroyed for every 20,000 shells fired. Then, in May 1941, something changed. Over 3 consecutive nights, British gunners shot down 61 German bombers. The Luftwaffe never returned in force. What happened during those 3 nights? The clock struck 20:47 on September 7, 1940, when the air raid sirens began their nightly wail across London. Flight Lieutenant James Thornton stood atop a Bofors gun emplacement in Regent's Park, watching the eastern horizon turn amber as the docks ignited. He was 32, a mathematics lecturer from Cambridge who'd volunteered the day after Dunkirk. Now he commanded a battery of anti-aircraft guns that, by his own calculations, were statistically irrelevant. The numbers haunted him. Since the Blitz began, his battery had fired 12,147 rounds of 3.7-inch ammunition. Confirmed kills, 0. Probable kills, 2, both disputed. The expenditure per hit across all British batteries stood at approximately 20,000 rounds per enemy aircraft destroyed. At £5 per shell, they were spending $100,000 to down a single bomber worth perhaps $15,000. The Luftwaffe lost more aircraft to mechanical failure than to ground fire. The fundamental problem was brutally simple. Shooting at aircraft in darkness was guesswork disguised as science. Searchlight crews swept the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of metal. Sound locators, massive concrete dishes with microphones, picked up engine noise. But by the time the data reached the guns, the aircraft had moved. Height finding was approximation. Speed estimation was hope. The shells exploded where the target had been 30 seconds ago, not where it was now. That night, as Heinkel bombers droned overhead and the Thames reflected firelight like molten copper, Thornton's crew followed procedure. Searchlights probed, predictors, mechanical computers operated by WAF operators calculated trajectories based on visual estimates. Guns traversed and elevated. Shells screamed upward, exploding in black puffs against the stars, nowhere near their targets. Below them, incendiaries fell in cascades, each one a white-hot magnesium star that burned through roofs and ignited timber. By dawn, the battery had expended 383 rounds. Hits, 0. The docks were a wasteland of twisted metal and ash. Thornton's log recorded 47 enemy aircraft detected, estimated altitude 12,000 to 18,000 feet. All successfully bombed their targets and departed unmolested. The same story repeated across 456 heavy anti-aircraft guns defending London. In Whitehall, the statistics reached Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding's desk daily. September losses: 247 civilians killed per night on average, 412 seriously injured. Luftwaffe losses to AA fire: 2.3 aircraft per night. At this rate, Britain could sustain perhaps 6 more months before morale collapsed entirely. The mathematical reality was undeniable. British anti-aircraft defences were theatre, not deterrent. The War Cabinet demanded solutions. Dowding established a research group at the Telecommunications Research Establishment in Malvern. The mandate was specific: find a way to hit aircraft we cannot see. Budget: whatever was necessary. Timeline: before London became uninhabitable. The team included radar engineers from the chain home stations, fire control specialists from Woolwich Arsenal, and mathematicians from university research departments. Leading them was Dr. William Butemant, a 34-year-old New Zealander who'd developed early radar systems. He brought something unusual: experience with radio proximity fuses from before the war, devices considered too complex for field deployment. The concept was theoretically straightforward, but practically impossible. Instead of relying on visual sighting, use radar to track targets continuously. Feed range, bearing, and altitude directly into predictors. Calculate not where the aircraft was, but where it would be. Transmit firing solutions electrically to gun layers. Remove human estimation entirely. The technical barriers were insurmountable according to conventional wisdom. The GL Memcade Seku radar, gun-laying Mark II, was massive, temperamental, and required skilled operators. Linking it mechanically to predictors meant redesigning equipment manufactured in dozens of factories. Training thousands of gunners in entirely new procedures during active bombing campaigns was logistically absurd. The margin for error was zero. If the system failed during an attack, crews would have no fallback. Butement's response was characteristically blunt. "We're shooting at darkness with our eyes closed. We cannot possibly do worse." By October, prototype systems were being tested at Bawdsey Manor on the Suffolk coast. The early results were marginally promising. Radar could track bombers at 30,000 yards in good conditions. Predictors could receive electrical data instead of shouted estimates. Guns could traverse faster when motor-driven. The integrated system reduced engagement time from 90 seconds to 45, but marginally promising meant nothing against nightly raids. On October 14th, a particularly brutal attack killed 412 civilians in a single night. On November 14th, Coventry's city centre ceased to exist. 568 dead, the medieval cathedral reduced to a shell. The public demanded to know why thousands of anti-aircraft guns couldn't stop bombers flying in predictable patterns, dropping bombs on obvious targets night after night. The answer, which couldn't be publicly admitted, was that the guns were obsolete the moment war began. Doctrine assumed daylight attacks at known altitudes against visible targets. Night bombing rendered pre-war tactics worthless. Churchill, visiting a battery in December after a particularly bloody raid, asked the commander directly, "How many have you shot down?" The reply, "None confirmed, sir," was repeated across every emplacement in Britain. By January 1941, the pressure was existential. If the Blitz continued through summer, Britain's industrial capacity would collapse. The docks, railways and factories were absorbing punishment they couldn't sustain. Absenteeism due to bombing exhaustion was rising exponentially. Food imports were falling. Something fundamental had to change, and it had to change in weeks, not months. Butement's team worked 18-hour shifts in unheated workshops, developing what became the Anti-Aircraft Command Integrated Fire Control System. 12 prototype installations were scheduled for deployment in London by March. The first operational test was set for April 16th, assuming German bombers continued their patterns. Everything depended on whether complex electronics could function under operational stress, whether radar operators could track multiple targets simultaneously, whether gunners accustomed to guesswork could trust mathematics they didn't understand. The fate of the entire air defense network rested on technology that existed only in theory, rushed into service because the alternative was surrender. The workshop at Woolwich Arsenal never slept. At 02:30 on March 23, 1941, Sergeant Eleanor Davies operated a lathe under flickering electric lights, machining brass components for GL Mackay II radar units. She was 26, a factory worker from Manchester who'd been recruited for special technical duties after demonstrating unusual aptitude with precision instruments. Now she worked 70-hour weeks producing equipment nobody would explain. The conditions were medieval. The arsenal operated under stringent blackout, meaning work continued in near darkness. Materials were catastrophically scarce. Copper, brass and rubber were prioritized for naval vessels, leaving anti-aircraft development scavenging from obsolete equipment. Components were cannibalized from broken radars, recalibrated and reintegrated. When ball bearings for gun-traversing mechanisms ran out, they machined new ones from melted-down church bells. The environmental challenges were relentless. March 1941 was bitterly cold, with temperatures hovering near freezing. The workshops had minimal heating due to fuel rationing. Workers wore fingerless gloves, but precision machining required bare hands, meaning constant risk of frostbite. Eleanor's hands were perpetually raw, bandaged with strips torn from old linen because medical supplies went to hospitals overwhelmed with bombing casualties. Above them, the Blitz continued with methodical brutality. On the night of March 19th, a particularly heavy raid struck South London. The blast wave shattered windows across the arsenal, sending glass fragments across workbenches. Production stopped for 4 hours while debris was cleared. When work resumed, the team discovered that shock had thrown calibration equipment out of alignment. Everything produced since the previous week needed retesting. The human cost was mounting. Workers were sleeping an average of 4 hours per night, cycling between day shifts at the arsenal and night shifts as ARP wardens or fire watchers. Rations were down to 1,800 calories daily, supplemented when possible with vegetables from allotment gardens. Tea was half strength, milk was powdered, meat was a memory. The joke circulating the arsenal was that Hitler was trying to defeat them through malnutrition, and might actually succeed. Technical challenges multiplied faster than solutions emerged. The GL Makeda 2 radar required a cathode ray tube display that consumed enormous power. The only available generators were diesel units originally intended for emergency hospital lighting. They ran constantly, burning fuel allocated from military reserves, each hour of operation requiring justification through 3 layers of bureaucracy. The predictor mechanisms, mechanical computers calculating firing solutions, needed continuous recalibration. Temperature fluctuations affected gear ratios. Humidity corroded precision bearings. A single miscalibration meant shells would miss by hundreds of yards. Quality control became obsessive. Every component tested, retested, then tested again. Production targets were missed repeatedly, and each delay meant more nights of ineffective fire. Lieutenant Thornton's battery received its integrated system on April 9th. Installation required 3 days of continuous work by specialist teams who arrived with equipment packed in wooden crates marked "Most Secret." The radar array looked like something from science fiction, a rotating antenna atop a lorry, cables snaking to a control cabin filled with glowing screens and chattering relays. Training was compressed into 48 hours. Radar operators, all WAF personnel, considered to have superior night vision and patience for monotonous monitoring, learned to distinguish aircraft echoes from ground clutter on cathode ray displays. Predictor teams learned to trust electrical data instead of shouted estimates. Gun crews learned to follow traverse indicators slavishly, even when their instincts screamed the targets were elsewhere. The first operational test occurred on April 16th during a moderate raid. Thornton's battery engaged 3 separate aircraft using the new system. Results: 27 rounds fired, 0 confirmed hits, but, crucially, near misses. Shrapnel from shells exploding within lethal radius was recovered near crash sites. The system was achieving something unprecedented: consistent accuracy. Wing Commander Thomas Pike, observing from headquarters, noted the transformation in engagement patterns. Traditional batteries fired in hope, shells scattering across square miles of sky. Integrated batteries fired in precision clusters, creating kill zones. The difference was unmistakable on paper. Whether it translated to actual kills remained unproven, but progress was agonizingly slow. By late April, only 18 batteries across London had integrated systems. The remaining 438 batteries continued firing blindly, expending thousands of rounds nightly with negligible effect. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, showed no signs of reducing operations. Intelligence reports suggested they were preparing for intensified attacks through summer, targeting railways and ports. Morale at the batteries was fragile. Crews worked through exhaustion, operating equipment they didn't fully trust, while bombs fell and civilians died. The dark humor was constant. "We're spending £1 million to inconvenience Jerry. Hitler's laughing so hard he can barely fly." But beneath the jokes was desperation. They needed proof the system worked. Not theoretical near misses, but burning wreckage. On May 7th, a breakthrough. Thornton's battery engaged a Heinkel He-111 at 14,000 feet, using full radar guidance. 16 rounds fired, ninth shell detonated within 50 yards, shrapnel shredded the port engine, aircraft crashed in Essex marshes, first confirmed kill using integrated fire control. The wreckage was recovered, analyzed, photographed for training manuals. Proof of concept validated. But one kill wasn't enough. Anti-aircraft command needed wholesale transformation. General Frederick Pyle, commanding all ground defenses, issued orders for emergency deployment of remaining systems. Every available radar unit, every trained operator, every calibrated predictor was rushed to London batteries. The timeline was brutal, full operational capability by May 10th. Failure wasn't an option because intelligence indicated a major Luftwaffe operation planned for mid-May. On May 8th, Eleanor Davies worked a 23-hour shift, producing the final components for the last radar installation. She collapsed at her lathe from exhaustion and was carried to the medical station, revived with strong tea, and returned to work within an hour. Across Britain, thousands of technicians, operators and gunners were pushing beyond sustainable limits because they understood the mathematics of survival. At 22:50 on May 10, 1941, radar stations along the Thames estuary detected formations approaching from the southeast. This was expected. Raids occurred nightly, but the scale was unprecedented. The plots showed over 500 aircraft in tight formation, indicating a maximum effort attack. Air raid sirens wailed across London as citizens descended into shelters for what they assumed would be another night of fire and fear. What the Luftwaffe didn't know was that they were flying into a transformed defense network. Across London, 57 integrated batteries powered up GL Mikael 2 radars. Cathode ray displays glowed green in darkened control cabins. WAF operators tracked incoming formations with precision impossible months earlier. Predictors hummed, calculating trajectories updated every 3 seconds. Gun crews stood ready, awaiting electrical firing commands instead of visual estimates. The German formation approached with confidence born of 8 months of successful operations. They flew at established altitudes, 12,000 to 18,000 feet, in standard patterns designed to saturate defenses. Pathfinder aircraft marked targets with incendiaries. Bomber streams followed, each aircraft assigned specific aim points. The doctrine had worked flawlessly for 247 consecutive nights. They had no reason to expect this night would be different. At 23:04, Thornton's battery achieved radar lock on a Dornier Doe 17 at 16,300 feet, range 28,000 yards. The predictor calculated lead time accounting for wind drift and projectile deceleration. Firing solution transmitted electrically to gun layers. 4 guns traversed and elevated in perfect synchronization. At 23:04:38, they fired. 8 seconds later, the 8th shell detonated 42 feet from the Dornier's starboard wing. Shrapnel punctured fuel tanks and severed control cables. The aircraft entered a spiral, crashing in Dagenham. First kill of the night engagement time, 38 seconds from detection to destruction. Across London, the pattern repeated. Batteries achieved radar lock, calculated solutions, fired in concentrated barrages. The crucial difference was consistency. Previously, hitting an aircraft required luck. Thousands of shells creating a random cloud, hoping for intersection. Now, shells converged on predicted positions. The sky over London became a precision kill zone. At 23:27, a battery in Hackney downed 2 Heinkel He-111s within 90 seconds. At 23:41, converging fire from 3 batteries destroyed a Junkers Ju-88, attempting evasive maneuvers. At 00:03, a Dornier flying at 18,000 feet, previously considered safe altitude, disintegrated under direct hit. By 00:30, 19 aircraft were confirmed destroyed, 12 more damaged and trailing smoke eastward. The Luftwaffe bomber crews, accustomed to ineffective ground fire, suddenly faced lethal accuracy. Radio chatter intercepted by Y-service listening stations recorded confusion. They're tracking us perfectly. Flak is following evasive turns. Multiple aircraft down, cause unknown. The carefully planned bomber stream began fragmenting as pilots broke formation, seeking safety that didn't exist. The turning point occurred at 01:15. A concentration of 4 integrated batteries achieved simultaneous radar lock on a tight formation of 6 Heinkels. The predictors coordinated firing solutions, a capability tested theoretically but never operationally deployed. 16 guns fired in salvo, creating an aerial kill box. All 6 aircraft were hit within 12 seconds. 3 crashed immediately, 2 limped eastward and crashed in the Channel. 1 made emergency landing in occupied France with 70% casualties. By Autun-sur-Saône, the raid was collapsing. German bomber commanders facing losses exceeding 10%, catastrophic by operational standards, ordered withdrawal. Aircraft jettisoned bombs randomly and fled. The all-clear sounded at 03:17. Final tally, 28 confirmed kills, 16 probable, uncounted damaged. British losses, 47 civilians killed, significantly below average for raids of this magnitude. The second night, May 11th, the Luftwaffe returned. Intelligence had reported heavy losses, but High Command assumed exaggeration or coincidence. Surely British defences hadn't fundamentally changed overnight. The raid comprised 380 aircraft, still a massive force. They were met by a defence network now operating with confidence. Radar operators had refined tracking techniques. Predictor teams had adjusted for previous night's conditions. Gun crews had seen the system work and trusted it completely. The engagement began at 22:35 and was even more devastating. By midnight, 17 aircraft were destroyed. Bomber crews, now genuinely terrified, began refusing to maintain course and altitude. The carefully choreographed attack dissolved into chaos as pilots took independent evasive action. But the integrated system adapted. Predictors calculated for evasive maneuvers. Radar tracked erratic flight paths. Guns followed targets through turns and dives. At 01:48, a remarkable engagement occurred. A Heinkel attempting to escape by diving to 3,000 feet, altitude where previous doctrine suggested safety from heavy AA fire, was tracked by radar through the entire descent. The predictor calculated a diving firing solution, something theoretically possible but never achieved operationally. 6 shells fired, 4th shell scored direct hit. The aircraft exploded over the Thames, witnessed by hundreds of civilians who cheered from shelters. The second night ended with 21 confirmed kills. Total for 2 nights, 49 destroyed, 31 damaged. The Luftwaffe had lost over 12% of committed forces. In air warfare mathematics, losses exceeding 5% per mission were considered unsustainable. Losses above 10% ended campaigns. May 12th, the third night. The Luftwaffe, unable to accept that British defences had achieved parity, launched one final maximum effort, 507 aircraft, every available bomber in northern France. The objective was psychological: overwhelm the defences, prove the previous nights were anomalies, break British morale before their own collapsed. They flew into a meat grinder. 57 batteries, now operating with refined coordination, engaged from the moment formations crossed the coast. The slaughter was methodical. Aircraft were tracked from 40,000 yards, engaged at 30,000, destroyed at 20,000. Bomber crews watched comrades explode ahead of them and pressed on because orders demanded it. By 00:15, 12 aircraft were down. By 01:23, Luftwaffe Bomber Command, monitoring radio traffic describing carnage, faced impossible choice: continue and lose entire force, or withdraw and admit defeat. At 01:37, withdrawal was ordered. The surviving aircraft fled, jettisoning bombs into the Channel. Third night total, 12 confirmed kills before withdrawal. Combined three-night total, 61 aircraft destroyed, 47 damaged beyond immediate repair, approximately 600 aircrew killed or captured. The Luftwaffe's bomber force was crippled. Statistical analysis indicated they couldn't sustain operations at these loss rates for more than one additional week. May 13th, the expected raid didn't occur. May 14th, nothing. May 15th, silence. The Blitz, for practical purposes, had ended. Not through attrition or strategic bombing of German bases, but through technological transformation that made night bombing over Britain operationally suicidal. When dawn broke on May 13, 1941, London woke to an unfamiliar sound: silence. For the first time in 247 consecutive nights, the Luftwaffe hadn't come. Air raid wardens stood at their posts, confused and suspicious. Surely the raiders were merely delayed, regrouping, preparing for an even larger assault. But sunset came, darkness fell, and the sky remained empty except for the hum of RAF night fighters on patrol. The statistical impact became clear over subsequent weeks. The 3 nights of May 10th, 12th represented the decisive turning point of the Blitz. Luftwaffe losses: 61 aircraft destroyed, 47 damaged, exceeded combined losses from the previous 2 months of operations. More critically, bomber crew casualties approached 30% among participating units, a figure that rendered continued operations psychologically impossible. German bomber command records, captured after the war, revealed the internal crisis. On May 13th, unit commanders reported widespread refusal to fly additional missions over Britain without fighter escort. Impossible at night. Aircrew morale had collapsed. The operational assumption that British defences were ineffective had been catastrophically disproven. Continuing the campaign would require complete tactical restructuring, resource commitments Germany couldn't afford while preparing for Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. The strategic consequence was profound. The Blitz had aimed to break British industrial capacity and civilian morale, forcing negotiated surrender before America entered the war. Instead, British cities endured, production continued, and morale, battered but unbroken, solidified around the narrative of resistance. The 3 nights demonstrated that technological innovation, implemented desperately by exhausted workers and operators, could neutralize numerical superiority. The human cost was calculated months later. The integrated fire control system, rushed into service through extraordinary improvisation, had saved an estimated 14,000 civilian lives by ending the Blitz 3 months earlier than projected continuation. Additionally, preventing destruction of ports and railways preserved Britain's capacity to receive American Lend-Lease supplies, which proved decisive in 1942-43. For those who made it possible, recognition was complicated. Lieutenant Thornton returned to Cambridge in 1946, resuming mathematics lectures without discussing his war service. The integrated fire control system remained classified until 1958. He couldn't explain what he'd done until his former students were middle-aged. Eleanor Davies received a British Empire Medal in 1947, citation reading simply, "for technical services," with no elaboration. She returned to Manchester, working as a machinist until retirement, her role in transforming air defence unknown to family and friends. Dr. Buteman's team dispersed into post-war defence research, their innovations forming foundations for guided missile systems and computer-controlled weapons. The proximity fuse technology, refined through desperate improvisation during the Blitz, became standard in anti-aircraft systems worldwide. By the 1960s, the principles they'd established under bombing pressure were integrated into NATO air defence doctrine. The radar operators, WAF personnel who'd spent night after night watching cathode ray displays while bombs fell, returned to civilian life with technical skills that found unexpected application. Many became early computer programmers in the 1950s. Their experience reading electronic displays and processing rapid information flows, translating directly to emerging technology sectors. Their contribution to computing history remains largely unrecorded. The broader legacy extended beyond military technology. The Blitz defense transformation demonstrated that Britain could innovate under existential pressure, combining academic research, industrial production, and operational implementation faster than enemies anticipated. This capability, proven during the 3 Nights of Fire, became central to British military identity. The improvisation, the dry humour maintained under horror, the refusal to accept defeat as inevitable. In 1968, when records were partially declassified, historians began reconstructing the story. Surviving participants were interviewed, technical documents analysed, German records cross-referenced. The narrative that emerged was unexpected. The Blitz hadn't ended through gradual attrition or strategic German decision, but through a rapid technological leap implemented by individuals working beyond sustainable limits. A memorial was erected in 1975 at the former Woolwich Arsenal site, listing names of workers, operators and gunners who'd made the transformation possible. The inscription reads, "They turned mathematics into salvation." Survivors attended the unveiling, elderly now, some walking with difficulty, many meeting for the first time since the war. Eleanor Davies, then 74, spoke briefly. "We just did the work that needed doing. Didn't seem remarkable at the time." The statistical legacy is preserved in anti-aircraft command records. Before May 10, 1941, approximately 20,000 shells per confirmed kill. During the 3 nights, 286 shells per kill. The transformation represented a 70-fold increase in effectiveness, achieved through integration of existing technologies rather than revolutionary invention. The lesson endured. Victory often emerges not from superior resources, but from superior application of available capabilities. Lieutenant Thornton, invited to speak at a 1982 Royal Society lecture on military innovation, offered final reflection. "We weren't heroes. We were desperate people with mathematics and determination. The remarkable thing wasn't that we succeeded, it was that we had to try at all. But when your city is burning and you have one chance to stop it, you take that chance. The numbers either work or they don't. Ours worked." The 3 nights of May 10th, 12th, 1941 remain studied in military academies as case studies in rapid technological integration under operational stress. The integrated fire control system, born from desperation and implemented through improvisation, proved that even the most established military superiority could be negated through innovation. The Luftwaffe, confident after 8 months of success, flew into a transformed defense and never recovered. The echo of those nights persists in British military culture. The belief that ingenuity and determination can overcome material disadvantage, that ordinary people performing extraordinary work can alter history's trajectory, that when the mathematics of survival demands transformation, transformation becomes possible. 61 aircraft destroyed over 3 nights ended a campaign of terror that had seemed unstoppable. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The story of how ordinary British engineers, radar operators and gunners transformed defeat into victory through 3 nights of fire deserves to be remembered. If you found this untold history compelling, do subscribe to ensure you don't miss future explorations of Britain's hidden war stories. What other unsung innovations do you think changed the course of the war? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest victories are won not with armies, but with mathematics, determination, and a refusal to accept the impossible.